Hello, let's begin. We are on Module 60 to 64. We are going to be talking about psychological disorders. The modules cover a few psychological disorders in depth. We're not going to get to all of them in depth, but we will highlight a lot of them. Let's start off with Module 60. This is defining psychopathology. So what's normal? It costs around $60 billion a year to treat people who seek help for mental illness. Almost 20% of Americans adults suffer from a diagnosable mental disorder in any given year. In 2017, 47,173 Americans committed suicide. About 90% of those people have a diagnosable mental disorder. What is a mental disorder? It is a significant impairment in psychological functioning. The scientific study of mental disorders is called psychopathology. Social nonconformity refers to disobeying public standards for acceptable conduct. Extreme nonconformity can lead to destructive, self-destructive, or illegal behavior, such as drug abuser or prostitute. We have to be careful to separate unhealthy nonconformity from creative lifestyles. Many eccentric people are emotionally stable. We have to consider the situational context before we judge if it's abnormal. Situational context is the social situation or setting in which a behavior occurs. For example, is it non-conforming for a grown man to remove his pants and expose himself to another man or woman in a place of business? Well, it depends on whether that other person is a bank teller or a doctor. So I'm going to switch slides real quick. This lady right here, she is a mother of 4. She is a former lawyer. She holds the Guinness Book of World Records for the most body piercings, for the most tattoos. As you can see, she's different. This goes back to that conformity, the nonconformity. She is very nonconformist, as you can tell. She does not have a mentally, she's not mentally ill at all. Again, she has 4 kids. She was a former lawyer. She was abused as a child. She goes around speaking about domestic violence. You would think, oh, she's probably very mentally ill, but she is absolutely not. She's just creative in her thinking. She's creative in her ways. And she's definitely very eccentric. She's very emotionally stable as a person. So we have to, as I said, we have to know the person. We cannot judge the person. Probably first glance, you would have thought she is mentally ill, but knowing a little bit more about her, we know that she is not mentally ill. She's just very eccentric in her ways. Let's go back to that first slide. Moving on to culture. Culture is one of the most influential contexts in which behavior is judged. In some culture, it is considered normal to urinate in public. It is normal to appear naked in public. In our culture, that is not normal at all. That would be mentally ill to be naked in public or to be urinating in public. We would think something was wrong with that person in our culture. Mental illness is a maladaptive meaning. It is difficult to adapt to the environment and meet the demands of day-to-day life. Maladaptive behavior most often results in serious psychological discomfort, disability, and or loss of control or thoughts, behaviors, and feelings. So moving on, classifying mental disorders. So how do we classify them? They're classified by something called the DSM, that is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. We are on, I believe, the DSM-5. It is the 5th edition. There are hundreds of specific disorders. They are organized into 20 major categories. and we'll go over a few of these categories. Many disturbed people are comorbid, which is that they suffer from more than one mental disorder at the same time. For example, a depressed person may start taking drugs, legal or not. They may become addicted to the drugs, complicating the primary mood disorder with a secondary substance use disorder. So more than 40% of all people with mental disorders are comorbid. So that means basically they have one or more mental disorders at the same time. The DSM-5 was printed in 2013. The first DSM was published in 1952. The DSM-5 reflects recent scientific advances and cultural changes. So, back in 1952, homosexuality was in the DSM. In 1974, it was omitted. ADHD was not a disorder in the original DSM, but since it has been included in one of the most widely diagnosed disorders, it is in the DSM now. Labeling someone mentally ill is a very serious business. Lots of studies have been done over labeling the impact of labeling. In 1972, a guy named David Rosenhan illustrated an impact of psychiatric labeling. He and several volunteers had themselves committed to mental hospitals as schizophrenics. So the volunteers were graduate students, a housewife, a painter, a pediatrician, a psychiatrist, and 3 psychologists. So they used fake names. They went out to 12 different hospitals across the country, and they claimed to hear voices. Their mission was to see what would happen. And what they found really rocked the world of psychiatry. So according to Rosenhan, each of what he called the pseudo patients told the hospital staff about hearing voices, and these voices used the words empty, hollow, and thud. The pseudo patients claimed that the voices were difficult to understand, but sounded as if they came from the same sex of that of the fake patients. Other than making claims about voices and giving themselves phony names and false occupations, the pseudo patients, and Rosenhan was among them, made up nothing else. None of them had any significant history of any kind of mental illness. All of them were admitted to psychiatric units, at which point they stopped reporting any psychiatric symptoms. Still, nearly every person in the experiment was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Their hospitalizations ranged from 7 days to 52 days. Doctors prescribed them more than 2,000 pills, including antipsychotics and antidepressants, which the pseudo patients largely discarded. In the hospital, staff often misinterpreted the pseudo patient's behavior to fit within the context of psychiatric treatment. So, for an example, the pseudo patient took notes while studying the environment of the psychiatric ward. One nurse reportedly wrote in the chart, "Patient engages in writing behavior." Although none of the pseudo patients were unmasked by hospital staff, other patients on the psychiatric units became very suspicious of them. Across several of these hospitalizations, 35 patients expressed doubts that the pseudo patients were actually mentally ill, according to his study. Still, Rosenhan's conclusions were stark. People pretending mental illness all gained admission to psychiatric units, and after they stopped faking symptoms, remained there for lengthy periods. He famously wrote, "It is clear that we cannot distinguish the sane from the insane in psychiatric hospitals." Mental illness in our culture is stigmatized. People who have been labeled mentally ill are less likely to be hired. They also tend to be denied housing and are more likely to be falsely accused of crimes. The fear of stigmatization is one major reason people do not seek help. People with psychological disorders may have problems that are more severe or long-lasting than the most of us experience. Otherwise, they aren't that much different. The term used to describe mental illness are meant to aid communication about human problems. The dangers of labeling mean that if psychiatric labels are used carelessly, they can oppress people. For example, in the mid 1800s, slaves who tried to escape were sometimes labeled as drapetomania. Drapetomania is a mental disorder that causes slaves to run away. What was cure? Amputating the toes. Even today, there are stereotypes about psychological disorders. Typically diagnosed by confirming the presence or absence of a number of symptoms. For example, major depressive disorder. One symptom is being in a depressed mood. So most of us get depressed from time to time. The symptom won't qualify for this diagnosis unless the mood is unusually tense and has gone nearly all day every day for at least 2 weeks. There are 8 additional main symptoms to continue, such as loss of interest, sleep difficulties, fatigue, thoughts of suicide. So at least 5 of the 9 main symptoms must be present nearly all day, every day, and for at least 2 weeks. So there are positive and negative symptoms. So positive symptoms are delusions, hallucinations. They are exaggerations compared to normal behavior. People who have delusions hold strong false beliefs that they insist are true, regardless how much of the facts contradict themselves. For example, if I was convinced that I would be president of the United States of the world, there's no way I would be president of the United States of the world. But people that have delusions, if they were fully convinced that they would be they were going to be the president of the United States of the world, there would be no doubt in their mind that they would become that. Hallucinations are imaginary perceptions, such as seeing, hearing, smelling things that don't exist in the real world. The most common is hearing voices. And then we have negative symptoms. Negative symptoms are absence or deficiencies compared to normal behavior. So, for example, people that display a lack of emotion, they're flat affect, they have a blank expression. That's a negative symptom. So moving on to the causes of mental illness, it can be a combination of biological, psychological, and or social factors. So biological factors include genetic defects, chronic physical illness or disability, exposure to toxic chemicals, or even head injuries. Problems directly related to the nervous system damage that arise before adulthood, like autism or Down syndrome, are called neurodevelopmental disorders. Down syndrome is a form of intellectual disability, is a genetic defect. The defect involves an extra 21st chromosome. Neurocognitive disorders are problems not arising until adulthood, like Parkinson's disease. These disorders are often serious mental impairments in old age caused by deterioration in the brain. We see major disturbances in memory, reasoning, judgment, impulse control, and personality. Alzheimer's disease is the most common neurocognitive disorder. So lose ability to cook, drive, read, write, and do math. They may even eventually become bedridden and mute. It appears to be related to an unusual web and tangles of the brain that damage areas important for memory and learning. I had a great grandma that had dementia, which is a form of Alzheimer's. Her personality changed in every aspect. She was a sweet person. She was very caring, very loving. With dementia, with this form of Alzheimer's, she got really mean and really hateful, especially to her daughter. She would tell people on her daughter. She would tell people that her daughter stole her things, which in reality did not happen. But she got her whole personality changed. She was still, to us, she was still sweet and she was the best great grandma I ever had, the only one I ever knew. But her total personality had changed on every aspect because of the Alzheimer's, because of that dementia. Moving on to psychosocial factors. So this is stress. This is psychological trauma, learning disorders, having a lack of knowledge, a lack of control. Family factors include parents who are immature, mentally disturbed, parents that are criminals, parents that are abusive, parents that give children poor discipline, parents that lack that communication skills. Social conditions include poverty, stressful living conditions, homelessness, or even having way too many people in a household. So we're going to move on to Module 61. This is psychotic disorders. Now, this is where we'll be getting into the disorders. So psychotic disorders. Psychosis involves a loss of contact with shared views of reality. Psychosis can occur in Alzheimer's disease, bipolar, and even drug use disorders. So in this module, we're going to focus on delusional disorders and schizophrenia. Psychosis are characterized by one of the more following: delusions, hallucinations, disturbed thoughts, disturbed speech, disturbed motor behavior, or social emotional isolation. Typically, psychotic patients can't control their thoughts, they can't control their emotions, and they can't control their actions. Psychotic disorders are one of the most difficult to treat. Drug therapy can help, but many end up in prison or even committed to a mental hospital. Delusional disorders. People with delusional disorders usually do not suffer from hallucinations, disturbed motor behavior, or even emotional excesses. The main symptoms of delusional disorder is the presence of deeply held false beliefs. So there are many types of delusional disorders. Erotomanic type, people have erotic delusions that they are loved by another person, especially of a higher status or celebrity. So these people think that maybe Tom Cruise loves them. Maybe think another celebrity loves them. Then we have grandiose type. People suffer from this delusion that have some great unrecognized talent, knowledge, or insight. So they may believe they have a special relationship with an important person or God, or they may even believe that they're famous. Then there's a jealous type, having an all-consuming but unfound belief that your spouse or lover is unfaithful. So this is, again, you're jealous of your spouse. You think and you know that they're unfaithful at all times. Then we have persecutory type. So this is the belief that you are being conspired against, you're being cheated on, you're being spied on, you're being followed, you may be poisoned, or you may even be harassed. Then we have somatic type. So believe that their bodies are diseased or rotting, that their body is infested with insects or parasites, or that part of their bodies are defective in some type of way. The most common delusional disorder is paranoid psychosis. So this centers on the delusions of persecution. They believe that they're being plotted against, being cheated on, or being followed. So these people are on guard at all times. It's almost impossible to treat a person with paranoid psychosis because they don't accept the help that they need. They don't realize that they need help. They're not necessarily dangerous to other people, but they can be. People that might be dangerous might believe that the mafia or terrorists or a gang are closing in on them. So delusional disorders are pretty rare. But I want to show you a video of delusional disorders, and it kind of explains what I just explained a little bit in further detail. So here's a video. Let's watch it.
For a person with delusional disorder, the line between what is real and what is imagined is blurred.
Once known as paranoid disorder, Delusional disorder is a mental illness characterized by recurring non-bizarre delusions. For a person with delusional disorder, delusions center on scenarios that could happen even if they are far-fetched. Known as non-bizarre delusions, such scenarios include being followed, cheated on, conspired against, or poisoned. These delusions usually involve the misinterpretation of perceptions or experiences. In reality, however, the situations are either not true at all or highly exaggerated. For most people with this condition, delusions center around one specific theme. Knowing this, mental health professionals subcategorize delusional disorder into 5 groups: erotomanic, grandiose, jealousy, somatic, and persecutory. Erotomanic delusional disorder is illustrated by a sufferer's adamant belief that someone else is in love with him from afar. Grandiose delusional disorder is characterized by delusions of power and supreme importance. And when a person obsesses about a romantic partner's fidelity, jealousy delusional disorder is present. Somatic delusional disorder, meanwhile, is characterized by a sufferer's belief that he has a physical defect or medical problem. Finally, persecutory delusional disorder occurs when an individual thinks that he's being mistreated, spied upon, or conspired against. People whose fantasies fit in more than one of these categories are said to have a 6th type, mixed delusional disorder. Regardless of the classification, most sufferers tend to function and socialize normally outside of their delusions. This inconsistency makes the disease specifically interesting to researchers who suspect that people with delusional disorder have an imbalance of certain neurotransmitters in their brains. They have also found that people with the condition in their immediate families are more likely to develop it as well. Additionally, certain environmental factors like alcohol or drug abuse may also contribute to the condition. Regardless of the cause, if a person is suspected of having delusional disorder, other illnesses like schizophrenia must first be ruled out. Once a diagnosis is made, the cornerstone of treatment, psychotherapy, can begin. Some patients find that individual talk therapy is useful to help them recognize their distorted thinking, while others experience success with cognitive behavioral therapy, which makes it possible to change delusional thought patterns. Often, talk therapy is supplemented with one of the many types of antipsychotic medication on the market. Older antipsychotics like Thorazine and Prolixin, as well as newer options like Risperdal and Seroquel, are used to calm neurotransmitter activity in the brain, in turn reducing delusions. In some cases, antidepressants or tranquilizers may also help ease the anxiety and sadness that can come with this illness. Although delusional disorder is a chronic problem, these treatments can allow a person to experience a great deal of relief. So, if you believe you or a loved one are affected, it's vitally important to make an appointment with a mental health professional.
Let's move on to schizophrenia. People with schizophrenia do not have 2 personalities. A lot of people think that schizophrenia, that these people have more than one personality. That is not the case. There is a disorder that is called dissociative identity disorder that we'll talk about in a little while, that people do have more than one personality, but people with schizophrenia do not have 2 or more personalities. In any given year, one person in 100 has schizophrenia. It is a disorder characterized by disturbances in thought, perceptions, emotions, and behavior. These disturbances are so severe that a person's thoughts, actions, and emotions are no longer coordinated, resulting in personality disintegration, so conflicts within the personality. It's hard for people with schizophrenia to focus on one item of information at a time. Positive symptoms, such as delusions, frequently occur in schizophrenia. Paranoid delusions are common as well. Paranoid and schizophrenia centers on delusions of grandeur and persecution. Schizophrenics with paranoia also hallucinate, and their delusions are generally more bizarre and unconvincing than those in the delusional disorders. Schizophrenic delusions may include the idea that a person's thoughts and actions are being controlled, that thoughts are being broadcast, that thoughts have been inserted into a person's mind, or thoughts that have been removed from that person's mind. Another positive symptom is hallucinations. Most common is hearing voices. Some psychotic people feel insects crawling under their skin. They taste poison in their foods. Sensory changes like numbness or a loss of sensation or extreme sensitivity to heat, cold, pain, or touch can also occur. A paranoid schizophrenic may also feel forced to commit violence to protect themselves. So, for an example, in 1984, a guy named James Huberty brutally murdered 21 people at McDonald's in California. He had paranoid schizophrenia. So he first announced to his wife before going to McDonald's that he was going on a hunt to hunt humans. He was hearing command hallucinations in his head. So in his head, this hallucination said, "You need to go hunt humans. You need to go kill people." And so he went out to McDonald's and he killed 21 people because he heard this hallucination in his head. So how dangerous are the mentally ill? They can be very dangerous, as you just heard. One study suggests that mentally ill individuals that are substance abusers are more prone to violence than normal individuals. The mentally ill are more often the victims of violence than normal individuals. During a psychotic episode, the emotions of a person with schizophrenia may become very inappropriate. So, for an example, if a person with schizophrenia were just told his mother died, they may smile, they may giggle, or they become very, very happy. But sometimes a psychotic person may be depressed or display no emotion at all. Schizophrenia often involves withdrawal from contact with others, a lack of concern, a loss of interest in outside activities, a breakdown of personal habits, and an inability to deal with daily events. Sometimes they display catatonia. Catatonia is very interesting. So catatonia is not speaking while holding odd postures for hours and even days at a time. These individuals appear to be struggling to control their inner turmoil. They may have occasionally have an outburst or even have violent behavior. I have a video to watch on catatonia. Let's watch it together.
Like a warm candlestick, the body of the patient can be contorted into almost any posture. The patient may maintain the posture for several minutes.
Not all symptoms are equal in every schizophrenic. Various manifestations of schizophrenia are referred to as schizophrenia spectrum disorders. So this is when a person's personality disintegrates, is complete, and thinking, perception, feeling, and behavior are all highly disorganized. The results are like the ones we've seen in movies, basically. These schizophrenics are sometimes called disorganized schizophrenics. So, for an example, your book gives this example. Edna went to the mental hospital. She was placed in the woman's ward and proceeded to masturbate. Occasionally, she would scream and shout out obscenities. Other times she would giggle. She was known to attack other patients, and she began to complain that her uterus was attached to Moscow, Russia, by a pipeline that communists were using to invade. It sounds kind of weird. It sounds kind of funny, but this is how these type of schizophrenics would think. So her chances of improvement are very limited, and her social impairment is very extreme, as you can tell. If you have any questions over that so far, let me know. Email me, and I can, or chat with me on Tuesdays and Thursdays during your class time. I'd love to answer any questions. Let's move on talking more about schizophrenia. So what causes schizophrenia? It may begin at birth or even before birth. Women who are exposed to the flu virus or to German measles during the middle of pregnancy have children who are more likely to become schizophrenics. Malnutrition during pregnancy and complications at the time of birth can have also similar impacts. Often the victims of schizophrenia were exposed to psychological trauma, such as sexual abuse, death, divorce, or other stresses of childhood. Heredity is a factor as well. It appears that some individuals inherit a potential for developing schizophrenia. They are more vulnerable to this disease. So what about twins? If one identical twin has schizophrenia, then the other twin has a 48% chance of also becoming schizophrenic. So very few people with schizophrenia have children. So how could a genetic defect be passed from one generation to the next if they don't have children? One suggestion is that the older the man is, even if he doesn't suffer from schizophrenia, when he fathers a child, the child will be more likely to develop schizophrenia. Genetic mutations occur in aging male reproductive cells and increase the risk of disturbed brain development, leading to schizophrenia. Scientists believe that people with schizophrenia have an imbalance of brain chemicals or neurotransmitters. So dopamine, glutamate, and serotonin. These neurotransmitters allow nerve cells in the brain to send messages to each other. The imbalance of these chemicals affects the way a person's brain reacts to stimuli, which explains why a person with schizophrenia may be overwhelmed by sensory information, such as loud music or bright lights, which other people can easily handle. The problem in processing different sounds, sights, smells, and tastes can also lead to hallucination and delusions. The brains of schizophrenics appear to be shrunk. So if you have your book, on page 533, there is a picture of a normal brain and a schizophrenic brain. The schizophrenic brain may not be able to create new neurons to replace the old ones that have died. Most psychologists today accept the stress vulnerability hypothesis to best fit our understanding of schizophrenia. Anyone subjected to enough stress may be pushed to a psychotic break, for example, battlefield psychosis. However, some people inherit a difference in brain chemistry that makes them more susceptible to developing psychotic disorders. The right mix of environmental stress and inherited potential brings about mind-altering changes in the brain. Again, if you have any questions over schizophrenia, let me know, or delusional disorders, just let me know. Let's move on to Module 62. This is over mood disorders. Mood disorders are the presence of unusual disturbances in the emotions. They are among the most serious of all psychological disorders. Roughly 9.5% of the U.S. population suffers from a mood disorder. And there are two general types of these disorders. There's depressive disorders and bipolar. In depressive disorders, sadness, loss of hope, low spirits are exaggerated, prolonged, or unreasonable. Low spirits, hopelessness, and an inability to feel pleasure or take an interest in anything are signs of a depressive disorder. Other symptoms include fatigue, disturbed sleep, and eating problems, feelings of worthlessness, a very negative self-image, and thoughts of suicide. If a person is mildly depressed for at least 2 weeks, the problem is called persistent depressive disorder. In major depressive disorder, the depression is much deeper. Everything is bleak and hopeless. Persons have feelings of failure, worthlessness, and total despair. It is impossible to function at work and at school. Individuals may not even be able to dress themselves or even feed themselves. So this person may be very withdrawn or intensely suicidal. When depression alternates with periods of mania, one of the bipolar and related disorders is involved. During a manic episode, a person is loud, elated, hyperactive, grandiose, and agitated. A long-lasting but moderate alteration between depression and mania is called cyclomethic disorder. In bipolar 1 disorder, people experience both extreme mania and deep depression. In bipolar 2 disorder, the person is mostly sad and guilt-ridden, but has one or more mildly manic episodes. The mania is not as severe as in bipolar 1 disorder. Bipolar 2 patients that are hypomanic, so they have mild manic episodes, usually manage to irritate everyone. They are excessively cheerful, aggressive, or irritable. They may brag, talk too fast, interrupt conversations, or even spend too much money. So what causes mood imbalances is difficult to pinpoint. Depression is thought to be caused by a combination of environmental, psychological, biological, and genetic factors. The most enduring theories involve neurotransmitters, which are chemicals in the brain, causing an imbalance that leads to depression. So far, this theory has been difficult to verify. Scientists are still studying the causes of bipolar disorder, but the consensus is that bipolar disorder is caused by several factors that are working together. As bipolar disorders tends to be hereditary, researchers are currently trying to find a gene that may increase the risk of developing this disorder. Brain imaging studies show that the brains of people with bipolar disorder and depression differ from healthy brains, which suggests that brain structure and functioning may play a role in the development of mood disorders. Women are 50% more likely than men to experience depression. Why is that? Hormonal fluctuations tends to play a role in the cases of depression involving pregnancy, menstruation, and menopause. Researchers believe that psychosocial conflicts about birth control, parenting, and work, emotional support for everyone, and environmental factors are the main reasons for this difference. Let's talk about postpartum depression. It is a real thing. A lot of people don't think it's real, but it is definitely a real thing. About 25% to 30% of women experience maternity blues. So that is a mild depression that usually lasts from 1 to 2 days after childbirth. There's mild bouts of crying, fitful sleep, tension, anger, irritability. Those are basically normal for adjusting to childbirth, to having a new baby around. About 13% of women who give birth develop postpartum depression, which is a moderately severe depression that begins within 3 months following childbirth. Typical signs are mood swings, feelings of inadequacy, unable to cope with a new baby, and increased risk of self-harm. It also features a high level of restlessness and difficulty concentrating. It can last anywhere from 2 months to about a year. Women aren't the only ones that suffer from this. A depressed mom can seriously affect her child's development. Stress and anxiety before birth and negative attitudes toward child rearing can increase the risk of postpartum depression. Part of the problem could be hormonal. After a woman gives birth, her estrogen levels drop, altering her mood. So yes, it is a real thing. I asked my husband, I didn't remember, but I asked my husband after I had my kids if I had postpartum depression, and he said yes, especially after the second one was born. There are degrees of postpartum depression. There is, I guess you can kind of put it on a spectrum. You got the ones that are, you have postpartum depression, and then you have women that have it very, very, very severe. You hear about the cases that are very severe. They may put their child in an oven. I've heard of that, where they kill their child in an oven, probably because they have postpartum depression. You also probably have heard in the news, I think not too long ago it happened, where a mom drowned their children. Why? Because she had postpartum depression. I think she had like 3 children, and she killed them all in the bathtub by drowning all of them. Mine was not severe like that, but I did have it. I did have very much irritability with both of my children after I had my second child. He was attached, but he wasn't attached. I felt very angry that he didn't want me to hold him. I would be crying for no reason at all. I didn't sleep very well because he was always hungry, so I didn't sleep during the night. So I got angry at him. There was tension, and he might have known that. Maybe that's why he didn't want to be held as much as my first one. So yes, I did have it. It is a real thing. Eventually, you do get over it, and as they start to age, you do get over it. Sometimes you don't, though. Sometimes women need some medication to help them with that postpartum depression. And you don't want it to get so severe that you want to harm your children or kill them in any type of way. I was never to that point with postpartum depression. If you have any questions on postpartum or anything, just let me know. Keeping on with mood disorders, is heredity involved in major mood disorders? Yes, especially bipolar disorders. If one identical twin is depressed, the other twin has a 67% chance of suffering from depression as well. Depression can also be related to the seasons. There's something called SAD, or seasonal affective disorder. It's a depression that occurs only during the fall and winter months. So starting in the fall, people with SAD sleep longer, but they don't get good amounts of sleep. During the day, they feel tired and drowsy. They tend to overeat more. With each day that passes, they become more sad, more anxious, more irritable, and socially withdrawn. And this is seen more in the northern countries like Sweden and Canada. 9% of those from Alaska experience seasonal affective disorder, compared to 1% in Florida that has the SAD disorder. It's related to the release of more melatonin during the winter. 80% of SAD patients can be helped by phototherapy. So phototherapy involves exposing these patients to 1 or more hours of bright light each day. So it's best done in the morning, where it stimulates dawn in the summer. So light therapy or phototherapy can definitely help a person with SAD disorder. Suicide. Suicide is a diagnosable mental disorder. Usually depression or substance abuse is a factor in 90% of all suicides. A prior suicide attempt, a family history of suicidal behavior, the availability of firearms, feelings of hopelessness or worthlessness, antisocial, impulsive, aggressive behavior, severe anxiety, panic attacks, shame, humiliation, failure, and rejections are all risk factors of suicide. Suicide rates in the U.S. have revealed certain patterns. So four times as many men complete suicide. Women make more attempts. Men typically use a gun. Women tend to use drugs to overdose. Caucasians generally have higher suicide rates than non-Caucasians. The suicide rate among Native Americans is far the highest in the U.S. Most suicide victims are white males over 45. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among 15 to 24-year-olds. And school is a factor in these suicides. Also illegal drugs, chronic health problems. Also interpersonal difficulties. Married individuals have lower suicide rates than divorced, widowed, or single persons, at least among the men. All suicide threats should be taken seriously. 80% of potential suicides give warning beforehand. So what are the warning signs? So direct threats to commit suicide. So saying they will commit suicide. A preoccupation of death. So talking about death a lot. A person having depression, hopelessness, having rage, having anger. A person seeking revenge. Aggressive risk-taking. Withdraw from contact with others. A person having no sense or purpose of life. Sudden mood swings. Personality change. A person giving gifts of prized possessions is all signs or warning signs of suicide. So if you know someone like this, communicate with them. That's the best way to do is talk to them, offer support, offer your acceptance, tell them it's okay to ask if they're thinking about committing suicide. There are suicide prevention centers that a person can call into to talk to. If you know anyone like this, please communicate with them. Please talk to them before they even try to commit suicide. Moving on to Module 63, we are going to be talking about anxiety-related, and personality disorders in this module. So what is anxiety? It has become a problem, and when it becomes so intense that it prevents people from doing what they want or need to do, that's when they need help. People with anxiety disorders may feel threatened and don't know what to do about it. They struggle to control themselves but remain ineffective and unhappy. People with anxiety disorders display several characteristics. So they have a high level of anxiety. They have restrictive, self-defeating behavior patterns, a tendency to use elaborate defense mechanisms or avoid responses to get through the day, and pervasive feelings of stress, insecurity, and dissatisfaction with life. Certain anxiety disorders involve feelings of panic. Others can take the form of phobias or just overwhelming anxiety or nervousness. About 18% of adult populations suffer from an anxiety disorder. So here are some anxiety disorders. The first one is called GAD, G-A-D, or Generalized Anxiety Disorders. These people experience nearly constant, exaggerated worries. A person with this has to be extremely anxious and worried for at least 6 months. Sufferers may complain of sweating, a racing heart, clammy hands, dizziness, upset stomach, rapid breathing, irritability, and even poor concentration. More women tend to have GAD or GAD than men do. I was diagnosed with GAD a long time ago. I was probably, I was in high school, I think, when I was diagnosed with this. I'm always anxious. I'm always worried about something. I can't help it. I can't stop worrying. I can't stop being anxious about something. It's surprising that I'm a teacher, that I can stand up and talk to you. Even in graduate school, I had a hard time talking or giving a presentation. I would be so worried, so anxious about it, that I would struggle giving a presentation. So I'm kind of surprised that I'm able to get up. Well, this is different. Online class is different, but as you saw in class, I was able to teach you. I was able to get up and I'm not worried as much as I am nowadays. I worry about other things, not necessarily about giving presentations or giving speeches, but I'm more worried about other things in the world. Probably most of us right now in this world have some kind of anxiety about what is going on in the world right now. We don't know when this pandemic is going to be over with. We don't know when the coronavirus will get a vaccine for it. We don't know that. So probably most of us are feeling some kind of anxiety going on in the world right now because we don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of months. So moving on to panic disorder. People in a panic disorder, people are highly anxious and they also feel a sudden, intense, unexpected panic. So during a panic attack, a person experiences chest pain, a racing heart, dizziness, choking, feelings of unreality, trembling, or a fear of losing control. So many people, especially the first time they have a panic attack, they may think they are having a heart attack at the moment. They may think that they're going to die at the moment because they're having a heart attack. Or they may even think they're going insane at this point in time. Again, the majority of people who suffer from a panic disorder are women. Men tend to get them less. Men don't worry as much as women do. And then we have agoraphobia. So this is an excessive, irrational fear of being in public places. It involves the fear that something extremely threatening will happen in public, like a panic attack, having dizziness, having diarrhea, or a shortness of breath. About 4.2% of all adults suffer from agoraphobia during their lifetime. So going outside of the home alone, being in a crowd, standing in a line, crossing a bridge, or even riding a car can be impossible for this type of person. They can be prisoners of their own home. Social phobia. So people fear situations in which can be scrutinized, evaluated, or humiliated by others. This leads them to avoid certain social situations such as eating, writing, using the bathroom, or speaking in public. When situations can't be avoided, people endure them with intense anxiety or distress. It's common for them to have a pounding heart, shaking hands, sweating, diarrhea, mental confusion, or even blushing. Social phobias greatly impair a person's ability to work, attend school, or form personal relationships. So about 6.8 of all adults are affected by social phobia. In specific phobia, the person fears, anxiety, and avoidance are focused on specific objects, activities, or situations. So, for example, a spider phobia. About 8.7 of all adults have specific phobic disorder in any given year. So the most common phobias among Americans are spiders, insects, birds, snakes, heights, thunderstorms, water, airplanes, crowded spaces, or closed-in spaces, and even crowds. Most people have a fear of something, but a true phobia may lead to overwhelming fear, vomiting, wild climbing or running, or even fainting. So what causes anxiety? It can be explained by the stress vulnerabilities model. Anxiety disorders appear to be partly inherited. Studies show that being high-strung, nervous, or emotional runs in families. This is definitely true. All of my family has anxiety to some degree. All of us get a little nervous to some degree. My brother has it, my mom has it, and my dad has it, and I also do have it as well. We get nervous. We have anxiety in some form or fashion. 60% of children born to parents suffering from panic disorders have fearful, inhibited temperaments. These children are irritable and wary as infants, shy and fearful as toddlers, and quiet and cautious introverts in elementary school. And by the time they reach adulthood, they are at a high risk for anxiety problems. So there are 4 major psychological perspectives on the cause of anxiety. So the first one is psychodynamic approach. So this refers to internal motives, conflicts, unconscious forces. So again, Freud was the first one to propose the psychodynamic explanation for what he called neurosis. Freud said disturbance like those that we have described represent a raging conflict among subparts of personality, the id, the ego, and the superego. Intense anxiety can be caused by forbidden id impulses for sex and aggression that threaten to break through into behavior. So we may be tortured by guilt, which is the superego uses to suppress forbidden impulses. The ego, remember, is caught in the middle, which is very overwhelming. That is where our anxiety comes from. The humanistic existential approach. Carl Rogers believed that anxious individuals have built up unrealistic mental images of themselves. So this leaves them vulnerable to contradictory information. For example, if we have a self-image of being intelligent and we do bad on a test, then we may deny or distort our perception about ourselves being intelligent. Existentialism anxiety is when people start to wonder what life means and what their purpose is. These people can't find an answer to what life means. Adolescents can't have this type of anxiety, or adolescents can have this type of anxiety as they develop their identity. Then there's a behavioral approach. Behaviorists assume that the symptoms of anxiety disorders are learned. Phobias can be acquired through classical conditioning. So we can learn to fear, as we have already seen. We can learn to fear things. We can be taught to fear things as well. Then there's a cognitive approach. This view is that distorted thinking causes people to magnify ordinary threats and failures, leading to distress. For example, if you are socially phobic, you are constantly having upsetting thoughts about being evaluated at school. You are a perfectionist, excessively concerned about making mistakes. You perceive criticism when none exists. If you expect that a social situation will focus too much attention on you, you will avoid it at all possible. So anxiety-related disorders. Let's talk about OCD. So this is obsessive compulsive disorder. So these people that have this disorder are preoccupied daily with distressing, repetitive thoughts and urges to perform certain rituals. True obsessions are images or thoughts that force their way into awareness against a person's will. They are so disturbing that they cause intense anxiety. Types of obsessions are being dirty or being unclean, about whether one has performed some kind of action like locking a door, putting things in order, and taboo thoughts and actions, such as one spouse being poisoned or committing immoral acts. Under the umbrella of OCD is a hoarding disorder. It is excessively collecting various things. The traditional view of OCD is that obsessions give rise to compulsions, irrational acts that a person feels driven to repeat. And the idea is that the compulsive acts help control or block out anxiety caused by an obsession. So some people are checkers. They check the clock, they check the stove, they may check to see if they lock the door. And then some are cleaners. Some clean their hands or wash their hands many times a day. Many may clean their house many times a day. Not all obsessive compulsive disorders are so dramatic, though. Many simply involve extreme order and a rigid routine. That would make a person feel more in control and more secure about themselves. So what is the cause of OCD? There's one creative therapy called COD theory. So according to this theory, the problem actually begins with the compulsion. So for an example, a patient with OCD is washing his hand due to germs and being unclean. the patient will begin washing his hands more and more often. So in order to explain himself of why he's washing his hands so often, he speculates that it must be afraid of the germs. This compulsion leads to an obsession. Many behaviors become automatic, unconscious habits. So brushing our teeth, washing our hands, putting on clothes. The brain structures appear to be more abnormal in OCD patients. Trauma and stress-related disorders are behavior patterns also associated with high levels of fear or anxiety brought on by experienced traumatic stresses. So what is the difference between trauma and stressor disorders and anxiety? The people suffering the trauma and stressor disorder rarely experience a breakdown. An adjustment disorder occurs when ordinary stressors push people beyond their ability to cope with life. Examples of stresses: job loss, intense marital strife, chronic physical illness. People suffering from adjustment disorder may be extremely irritable, anxious, depressed, may have trouble sleeping, loss of appetite. Their problems can be relieved by rest, sedation, counseling, and a chance to talk through their fears and anxieties. And then we have acute stress disorder. This is when reactions last less than a month after a traumatic event. If they last more than 1 month, it is considered post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. So what is a traumatic event? Flood, tornado, war, terrorism, torture, violent crime, child molestation, rape, witnessing death. These are all traumatic events. Symptoms include relieving the event, avoidance of reminders about the event, insomnia, nightmares, poor concentration, explosive anger or aggression. So about 3.5% of American adults suffer from PTSD, and up to 20% of military veterans returning from war develop PTSD. Back when I was teaching in Hill College, I had a lot of military veterans, and one told me the story of his PTSD. He was off in a war in Iraq, and he had stayed there for many, many months. And when he came home, he said he lived in a very nice neighborhood, but occasionally it had some traumatic events happen. And one night he heard a gunshot happen in his neighborhood. And he said as he was sleeping, and as a military vet, he kept a gun under his bed, just laying under his bed. He heard that gunshot, and he automatically got underneath his bed, got the gun out, opened the window, and stuck it out. He said he didn't shoot the gun, but that was, in his mind, he was back in Iraq fighting the war because he heard that gunshot. And so he said his wife had to get up, tell him, hey, stop, you need to stop this. The police saw it happen. I think it was like right next door the gunshot happened, and the police saw him draw his gun. And so the police had to come over, and his wife had to say, hey, he's been over in Iraq for months and months, and so he has PTSD, and so he wasn't causing any issue, and they got away, but he was still hearing that gunshot brought back his reminder of being in Iraq. And so that's an example of PTSD. Dissociative disorders. So when a person has this disorder, they experience a disintegration of consciousness, memory, self-identity. They may have temporary amnesia or even multiple personalities. They can feel like they're outside their bodies. Dissociative amnesia is the inability to recall one's name, address, or even past. In extreme cases, a person with dissociative amnesia may experience dissociative fugue. Dissociative fugue involves sudden, unplanned travel away from home and confusion about personal identity. A person suffering from dissociative identity disorder, or DID, used to be known as MPD, or multiple personality disorders, has two or more separate identities or personality states. So one example, and this is my favorite disorder. I don't know anyone that has DID, but I think it's by far my favorite. I really got into psychology because I read a book about a person having multiple personality disorders or DID, and so I really kind of drew an interest in that. And when after I read this book, I actually went online and wanted to study MPD or DID a little bit more. It drew me into psychology, and so the most famous example is Sybil. She had about 16 personalities. There is a movie you can watch. It is called Sybil. Sybil is how you spell the name. Sally Field is in it. It's a great movie. It's a very long movie. If I was to show it in class, it would take about 3 full class times to watch the movie. Probably. I think it's close to 3 hours. But it's a very good movie. It's very frightening. If you watch it, you kind of need to be aware that it's kind of scary. Some people don't like it because it is scary, but it portrays a very good documentary about her. She had about 16 personalities, as I said. Each identity had a distinct voice, a distinct vocabulary, and a distinct posture. One personality could play the piano, while Sybil did not know how to play the piano. Sybil would experience a time lapse when another identity was in control. Her amnesia and alternate identities first appeared in childhood. She was beaten, locked in closets, perversely tortured, sexually abused, and almost killed as a child. A history of childhood trauma, and especially sexual abuse, is found in a high percentage of persons whose personalities split into multiple identities. A lot of people say this is not real, it's fake, but it is. It is real. It is, but it's very rare. You don't come across too many people that have DID, but it is one of my favorite disorders. It's a very interesting disorder. And I do recommend you watch Sybil. I think it is very good. It is based on a true story. Supposedly, there's a lot of controversy in that as well, but supposedly it's based on a true story. Do you know someone that's constantly worried about their health? So these people, they may believe they're dying because they have a cough or their heartbeat is fast. They have a fear of illness even when nothing is wrong with them, even when doctors can't find anything. This is somatic symptoms and related disorders. It occurs when a person has physical symptoms that mimic a disease or injury for which there's no identifiable physical cause. So it sounds like a hypochondriac, but then the latest edition of the DSM is called somatic symptom disorder. So people with this disorder display interpreting normal bodily sensation as proof as they experience disabling pain that has no identifiable physical basis. So this person typically goes to the doctor a lot. They feel ill a lot. Most of them take medicine. They do some kind of treatment, but there's no physical cause that can be found for their distress. Does anyone know anyone that has hypochondriac, as it used to be called? I do know someone that has hypochondriac. She is always in the hospital or going to the doctor because she has some kind of problem with her, even though she probably has no problem at all. She talks a lot. That's all she talks about is her problems. So you can't ever get another word in edgewise, but she talks about her problems all the time, and she has to go to the doctor for this. She has to go to the doctor for that, and she can never get better. And so she's definitely a good example of a hypochondriac. Then we have people that have Munchausen disorder or factitious disorder. So it can be imposed on the self or imposed on another person. Munchausen by proxy syndrome is when a person fakes the medical problem of someone in his or her care. So an example in your book, at 14, Ben was at the hospital again with the sinus problems. Since the age of 8, he had undergone 40 surgeries. In addition, he was diagnosed with bipolar, oppositional defiant disorder, and ADHD. He was taking 19 different medications, and his mother said that she desperately wanted him to be healed. She sought numerous tests and never missed an appointment. Left alone by the doctors, Ben revealed he was sick of being sick. His mother fabricated his illnesses. Sometimes they deliberately harm their children. In your book, it talks about one mother injecting her son with 7-Up. It's so crazy. Why would anyone want to inject their son or daughter with 7-Up? People with this disorder need to seek attention. They need to seek sympathy from the medical professionals, but they also want to win the praise of the medical professionals for being a health conscious or even a good parent at that matter. And then we have something called conversion disorder. It's a mental condition in which a person has blindness, paralysis, or other nervous system, neurological symptoms that cannot be explained by medical evaluation. So, for an example, a soldier might become deaf or lame or develop glove anesthesia just before battle. Glove anesthesia is a loss of sensitivity in the area of the skin that would normally be covered by a glove. It usually contradicts known medical facts. So the symptoms of nerves in the hand do not form a glove-like pattern and cannot cause such symptoms. If the symptoms disappear when a person is asleep or hypnotized, a conversion reaction has to be suspected at this point. If you have any questions, just let me know and we can talk about them. Moving on to personality disorders. Personality disorders are long-standing, inflexible ways of behaving that create a variety of problems. So let's talk about them all. Borderline personality. So people with BPD or borderline personality tend to be extremely sensitive. Some describe it as having exposed nerve endings. Small things can trigger intense reactions. And once upset, you have trouble calming down. It's easy to understand how emotional and voluntary and inability to self-soothe lead to relationship turmoil and impulsive and even reckless behavior. When you're in the throes of overwhelming emotions, you're unable to think straight or stay grounded. You may say hurtful things or act out in dangerous or inappropriate ways that make you feel guilty or ashamed afterwards. It's a painful cycle that can feel impossible to escape, but it's not. There is treatment for this, and there is therapy for this as well. Paranoid personality disorder. So what are the symptoms of this disorder? Believing that others have hidden motives, that others are out to harm you, doubting the loyalty of other people, being hypersensitive to criticism, having trouble working with other people, being quick to become angry or hostile, becoming detached or socially isolated. Narcissistic personality disorder is a personality disorder characterized by a long-term pattern of exaggerated feelings of self-importance, an excessive need for admiration, and a lack of empathy toward other people. Celebrities tend to appear to have narcissistic personality disorder than non-celebrities. Maybe because they have so much attention. Dependent personality disorder is an anxious personality disorder characterized by inability to be left alone. People with DPD, or dependent personality disorder, develop symptoms of anxiety when they're not around others. They rely on other people for comfort, for reassurance, for advice, for support. Histrionic personality disorder is defined by American Psychiatric Association as personality disorder characterized by a pattern of excessive attention-seeking emotions. Usually begins in early adulthood, including inappropriately seductive behavior and excessive need for approval. They are very overdramatic in their ways. Antisocial personality disorder displays no guilt, lack of empathy, and a disregard for social conventions. They lack a conscience. They are impulsive, they're selfish, they're dishonest, emotionally shallow, and very manipulative. They are poorly socialized and seen as being incapable of feeling shame, guilt, fear, loyalty, or love. Also called psychopaths. They tend to have a long history of conflict with society. Many are delinquents or criminals who may be a threat to the general public. Psychopaths are rarely the crazed murderers that you may have seen portrayed in the movies and media, but they are charming at first. Their friends only gradually become aware of their psychopath lying and manipulation. What causes psychopaths? Typically, people with antisocial personality show similar problems in childhood. They display subtle neurological problems. For example, they have unusual brain wave patterns that suggest under-arousal of the brain. This could explain why psychopaths tend to be thrill seekers. In one study, psychopaths were shown extremely grisly and unpleasant photos of mutilations. The photos upset normal people, but psychopaths showed no startled response to the photos. They are described as socially cold. Can it be treated? They are rarely treated with success. Psychopaths can manipulate therapy. They can act like they are cured. Antisocial behavior does tend to decline somewhat after the age of 40, even without treatment, but because people tend to be more mellow as they age. Again, if you have any questions over this, please let me know. I know this is a very fast session. I'm trying to do it as fast as I can to get through it. But if you have any questions, just let me know. Very last thing, we're just going to hit it briefly, is emotional intelligence. So what is emotional intelligence? It is the ability to perceive, to use, and to understand emotions in ourselves and others, as well as the ability to manage those feelings effectively. So can you recognize your own emotions? Can you recognize other people's emotions? Being emotionally skilled can make us more flexible, adaptable, agreeable, and even emotionally mature. So it's a very good thing to know what your emotions are, and it's a very good thing to recognize other people's emotions. So it's a natural to welcome positive emotions. It's a natural to avoid negative emotions. Recognizing emotions in yourself and in others can be helpful in terms of directing your behavior in the ways that you want to promote your own growth, your own positive relationship with others. Being able to control your emotions appropriately has important consequences for your health, for your achievement, for your relationships. So people who are smart emotionally are able to perceive, to use, to understand, and to manage their emotions. They are self-aware. They are very empathetic. They can use their emotions to enhance their thinking and even in their decision makings. So if you cannot distinguish your own emotions, if you cannot distinguish or even recognize other people's emotions, therapy may be your best help to get through this. You want to be smart when it comes to be emotional and to the emotional intelligence, and you want to be smart about that. So I would suggest if you can't do that, if you can't recognize emotions of yourself or emotions of other people, therapy would really help in that. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. I hope you have a good day. This ends our module 60 to 64. If you have any questions, just let me know.